Okay, so welcome everyone to our third episode of Turning Talk. And I think most of you, some of you have been on before. And basically, turn your phone off. um, so basically, we'll try to have everyone mute themselves. And when you want to talk, just unmute yourself and comment. The easiest way to mute and unmute yourself, if you have a keyboard, is Alt-A, and you'll just toggle your mute. And I think on a Mac it's Command-A. But anyways, the topic today is sanding sanding tools and finishing. But first, I thought we'd talk a little bit about. We'll just open it up to see if anyone has any general questions that you want to start talking about. Then I have two questions that came in, and then as we do, it's just a free-flowing discussion, guys. Anybody want to kick something off? Don't be shy.
Roger, I was curious if you made any arrangements to return the beads of courage boxes that we built.
So on the beads of courage boxes, there's one left, one kit left that I'd like to have get done. And then the original plan was at one of our meetings that we'd all get together, we'd take a picture of it with the all the boxes together and the turners, and that would sort of be what we use to publish it. We'll do an article for AAW. So I'm hoping that this week someone will pick up that last box. And then my thought is maybe we just, since I doubt we're going to be getting together at the MAC in the near future, they're shut down through September. I'll just ask if people can just gather someplace at a certain time. We'll take a picture and gather all of them. But for right now, just keep them all in the original box that you got. Remember to fill out the little credit card size or business card size with your name on it, and we'll go from there. So I think all of you got the notice that the company store is open. We've gotten a lot of orders, a lot of orders, and so we have probably the location. The location was to be determined. We determined that the best location right now is going to be near the Rockler store. If you've been to Rockler, which probably all of you have, in the far right corner there was a Hollywood Video that we used to meet at, and then it turned into some kind of restaurant.
It's the Wild Wings, Buffalo Wild Wings.
So that parking lot's generally pretty open, so we're going to meet there at between 12 and 1 o'clock, and you can come pick up your order then. Okay, Jim, you sent in a question. Has anyone tried dipping or soaking bowls or whatever in oil when finishing? I've read that where Hawaiian turners do this, particularly with Norfolk Island pine. Want to say anything more about that, Jim?
No, just, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. I've read about it and I tried it once and it actually worked pretty well, but I've never heard anybody talk about it. The only thing I saw was that if you leave them in there too long, they tend to bleed out for a while afterwards. And so not only do you have to let them drip off well, but you have to wipe them periodically to get the excess off so it doesn't get gummy. But I was just wondering if anybody else has ever tried it. I had a commission one time and I had to do, I forget, 8 or 10 bowls for somebody. And I just thought it was a convenient way to sort of finish all of them fairly quickly, and it worked pretty well.
What kind of oil did you use?
I used tung oil. I diluted it with mineral spirits, 2 parts mineral spirits, 1 part tung oil, and it worked well. I put it in a 5-gallon bucket and put maybe 3 gallons in there. and then sealed it up afterwards, and I'm still using it a year later, and it's still good.
So you did it after you turned the bowl?
Oh yeah, the bowls are finished.
How long was it soaking for?
Sorry?
How long did you soak it?
Some of them maybe an hour. Excuse me, some maybe an hour. I think a couple of them I soaked overnight.
Anybody have any comment, guys?
I was saying earlier, I thought that would be an interesting way to kind of just keep a big gallon of walnut oil there, so I could just dip it in and do it. And I went to the expert and talked to Mike Mahoney about it, and he said that there's really no reason, at least with a utility walnut bowl that you're going to use daily or wherever, you don't need to soak it for very long. It's just a matter of dipping it in. And if that's convenient for you to dip into a big thing, then, and you're doing a lot of bowls, then have at it. But he said you really don't need to do it longer than just kind of like a submerge and then kind of swish it around and then wipe it down after it's soaked in a little bit. And I think also if you leave it in for too long, it would tend to seep out until it finally cures.
Yeah.
It takes a while for it to cure.
I haven't tried it, but I thought the Norfolk Island pine stuff, they were soaking it so that the oil would penetrate all the way through, and then the bowls would become translucent because of the oil in them. And I've never tried it, but I thought that was sort of a special case because people like to see them glow.
That's good.
I treat my bowls with walnut oil on the lathe, and then I friction polish the walnut oil to get it really hot and sealed it up. And I have a couple of bowls that my kids have that they've been using them for 2 years, almost 3.
Yeah, I heard the same thing that Harvey said, and have seen bowls like that where they Norfolk Island pine, they turn them fairly thin, and then they soak them so they become translucent.
Cool. Hey,
You know
Mike, is your audio working now? Your audio is not working.
Mine?
Oh, you're back.
Okay. Sorry about Mike Meredith's having a little trouble logging in and getting his audio to work here. Okay, is Mike Porter on? Let's see. Okay, Mike had a question. We'll wait to see if he logs in.
Yeah, I'll ask a stupid question. What's your favorite finish? I know I just started a religious war.
Well, I think a lot of us are sort of walnut oil guys. I don't know.
This is Jim. I'm not yet a walnut oil guy. I'd like to be, but I have the same issue that Mike Porter's question asks about. So I'm very curious to find out what the answer to that is, and I hope he comes on so we can talk about it. My favorite finish for most pieces, bowl-like things and vases, and that is wipe-on poly. For
Okay.
small stuff like bottle stoppers and even my little birdhouse ornaments, I use Mike's Pens Plus.
Yeah, so far the few things turned, I've treated them sort of like a cutting, and effectively it's been mineral oil and then a combination of carnauba and bees and mineral oil.
Jim, do you go for a glossy finish? You're muted.
You're muted, Jim.
Still
Am I
muted.
the Jim you're talking to?
Okay, here we go. I use the satin finish wipe-on because I don't like a real glossy finish on my work.
And what do you see see is the difference between what you produce and what other people get with walnut oil?
I find it easy to use, and it takes several coats, maybe as many as 6, and they have to cure sort of overnight between coats. So it's a time-consuming process, but I like the result. And I have not perfected a technique with walnut oil to the point where I can predict it's going to work.
Nice.
Well,
Well,
sand
you
between your
do
coats?
work, so.
Do you sand between your coats, Jim?
The first couple of coats I usually do, but only with maybe 600 grit, unless it depends on the wood. But sometimes I'll sand it, hit it with some 320 if I don't like the way the finish and feel is. But after the first couple of coats, I used to sand between them, and then I quit. Found I don't need to.
One more comment on Jim's finishes. If anybody's seen his ornaments, they are gorgeous, and his finish work is superb. So that wipe on poly obviously does a good job.
Thanks, Larry.
There's a product that Rockler sells called Brie Wax that I actually started using that because it's a quick, easy finish. And if you do it while it's on the lathe and you put the first coat on under friction, then it polishes out really well. And the finish is maintained pretty well. If I'm not going to use the doctor's pen polish, then I'll use that.
Is that just
Can you hear me?
a wax combo?
Yeah, it's a wax combo. And it's pretty easy to use. It's got a strong smell to it, so use it in a well-ventilated area, but you shouldn't do that for polyurethane too.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah,
Yeah.
how about
Eh,
that?
Anyway, the only important question about finishing wood is what do you like? And once you decide that, it's up to you to figure out how to do it. I prefer the oil finish because, yeah, we can reach down here, grab some.
That's on my bench right now
Yeah.
because I'm making
Hey,
pens.
Mike, basic marketing, product placement.
Now, the Brie wax is a good finish. It's mostly carnauba wax. The only problem with Brie wax is always wear nitrile gloves because that strong smell is Stoddard solvent. That goes right through your skin and straight to your liver. But it's volatile. That's why Stoddard solvent has been a commonly accepted solvent. Although they're all short chain hydrocarbons, they're all very volatile. So they gas away very quickly and almost completely. But when you're putting it on, they will go through the skin, but the nitrile gloves will stop them. Mineral oil and beeswax, possibly the two worst things you can put on wood. Not to rain on someone's parade there. The thing about beeswax is that when it's exposed to air, I guess if I wanted to I could bring up the electron micrograph of a beeswax surface. It starts to break down because beeswax is the only wax that's made to be digested. The bees eat the honeycomb and they break down the wax, secrete new beeswax. So it has an oxygen sensitive link in the arms of the wax. So it'll start to get this white dust. Hang on, I've kept an example of it. Okay, so can you see the white specks on that?
Yeah.
That's beeswax that's oxidized. You'll recognize one of the old Avicera earring holders from God knows how many years ago. I've kept it just as an example of what beeswax can do. The way you stop that is you add a little bit of carnauba wax to your beeswax. And that makes it a little bit harder and a little more resistant to air. So if you like the beeswax finish, great. Mineral oil is going to evaporate within 30 days after you put it on the surface. So it does no good for the wood, except as a carrier for your wax. So, and you know, it's also a platform for bacterial growth while it's on the wood and all sorts of other curious things. What do you like? That's the only important question. Now, I do use occasionally polyurethane, and I went down and I grabbed this just because someone was going to ask about it. This is a polyurethane made out of whey protein, milk. The state government of Maine, they have so many dairy farms and so many cheese factories that disposal of whey milk liquid products was a real problem. So they paid someone to go figure out what you can do with whey. There are little Miss Muffet, Saturn or Tuffet, eating your curds and whey. Well, the curds, you know, that's cottage cheese, and the whey is all the liquid that's left over after the curds have congealed. And what they found was that they could make a polyurethane-like wood finish out of the whey proteins from milk. And we forget that the first plastics were actually made from milk also. So that's not new chemistry. But I like this one because it really basically has no smell, and it sets up very nicely and it produces a beautiful satin finish. Anyway.
You know anything about its durability?
I have pieces that I finished 8 years ago that have not needed redoing.
Wow, and where do you get it?
This I actually ordered online. And the only thing, I don't use it for turn pieces, but if I'm doing flat work, I'll use that as a brush on finish, but it should work just fine on turn pieces too.
Mike, how does that compare to milk paint?
Not even remote. Milk paint, the proteins of milk have a very interesting property. They stick together, and because they stick together, they can form a solid surface. The milk paint, I have no idea the history of it. I'll bet you someone does, and I bet it's fairly interesting. Who discovered that if you mix a pigment with milk, you can make a usable paint? But that's, you know, the whey-based polyurethanes using the whey proteins to polymerize to make a solid. And with the milk paints, I think you're really just using, there's not enough protein in it for the milk to become anything much more than a carrier of the pigments.
And no, it's a really hard finish.
Oh, it is. It is. And the reasons for that are, I've heard all sorts of explanations. One being that the milk actually drags the pigment into the wood farther than other carriers. I don't know if that's true or not. Also, I think the pigments that go into milk paint tend to be very hard. They're not just pigments, they're colored chalk, basically. So you're making, that's why you get that sort of chalky sort of look to the milk paint finish. And that chalk on the surface, I guess, goes back to its, you know, natural rocky state, but it does last forever. You see particularly the old shaker, the Pennsylvania Dutch furniture from the late 1800s done with milk paint still looks pretty darn good. Not been redone.
One
I
question
tried putting it on bowls and putting multiple coats on of different colors, and then trying to sand back and get some of the other colors to come out. And you really have to work with the sandpaper to get down through the layers.
It's hard.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's why it's great.
Mike, what was the name of that polyurethane product? I can't see it.
Vermont Natural Coatings.
Could you type it in on chat, and then people can copy it? Then one question I had, Mike, is all walnut oils the same?
No. And if you'd like to see experimental data for that, I've been actually running a little experiment on it. Vermont Natural Coatings.
What are the variables?
The variables are, okay, be right back. Let me go get some data for you.
Yeah.
So one thing I have noticed with some walnut oils, I get a little bit of, the grain rises a little bit, and I don't know if there's water in it and that's why it's raising the grain.
Mm. I don't know. Sometimes you read online that just go to the grocery store and get some any oil, and I don't think that's a good idea.
Well, if it's online, it must be true.
Yeah, right.
I will usually spray a little bit of denatured alcohol or water on my final sanded piece a couple times and just like raise the grain and do that, and then I'll put the walnut oil on, and that seems to help a lot.
Systems.
Well, I had a bunch of Mike Mahoney's walnut oil, and then I bought some from a different person, and I get a different finish out of the two different walnut oils. And maybe Mike can explain why. I don't know.
Yeah, actually, I can. I don't know if you can see this or not. That is my walnut oil in the bottom of the cup with the fly trapped in the amber that'll last forever. You notice it's not rolling around, it's a solid. Okay. This is Mahoney's that's been sitting there for the same amount of time. You notice it's about to pour out of the cup. Has not set up. The difference in the walnut oils is, Mahoney's oil is darker. It is one step less refined than what I use. His is not a food grade walnut oil, mine is. The polymerization of the walnut oil, what it takes to make that little solid in the bottom of the cup is light, heat, and oxygen. The dark color, the pigment, part of the thing about Mahoney's oil is the pigment will absorb the light. So you're cutting down on one of the variables that drives the polymerization process. Secondly is the refinement. One of the things that's refined out of the oils in that last step, if you taste Mahoney's oil, it's not poisonous. If you taste it very carefully, you'll notice something that tastes like olive oil. Whereas if you taste mine, it's actually a delicious salad dressing if you ever feel the need to do it. That last step of the refinement takes out the class of fatty acids that only has one double bond in it, which is the flavor element of olive oil, a delta 9 fatty acid. Thinking back to your biology degree, Bill. The problem with that is for the polymerization to proceed, you've got to have more than one double bond. The olive oils only have one double bond. They're omega-9 fatty acids. Very good for your heart, not much good for polymerizing in your wood. So there are lots of reasons why it doesn't polymerize as well or as fast. It's also higher in water, which may be why it raises the grain a little bit. We don't think of oil as having any water in it, but actually, even the olive oil or the walnut oil that I use has about 4% water, because the polyunsaturated fatty acids are much more hydrophilic than the saturated fats. They bind water a little better. So it's like alcohol. You take a bottle of Everclear, 200 proof. As soon as you open it, you have Everclear 95 proof, 190 proof, because it takes up 5% water from the air just instantly. So even things that we don't think of as having water content does have some water. The darker oils have a little more water than the refined oils. Thirdly, where the oil comes from has an effect. There's hang on.
From walnuts.
Yeah.
So I see Jim Moore joined, and I want to give a shout out to Jim because all those cool boxes of wood we do at our raffle have been donated by Jim. Hi, Jim.
Hey, Jim. If you look on Amazon, you'll find this oil. Okay, this is walnut oil, Jugulans regia, the English walnut. And this is an oil that's produced in China. Now, not everything produced in China is not good, but if we look at this one, notice it's also sort of running. It didn't polymerize either. And the reason for that is the growth conditions that the nuts are produced under dictates the composition of the oil. The Chinese oil does not have the polyunsaturated fatty acids that the oil is grown in California or France or anywhere in Europe. Italy makes actually the best walnut oil around for some reason. So the low number of polyunsaturated fatty acids, it'd probably be a dandy salad dressing, good source of omega-3 fatty acids, but it doesn't polymerize. So there's all sorts of factors that go into the oil. And now that you all know more than you ever wanted to know about walnut oil, it's a good finish. I like it. I've never dipped. I know people in Hawaii particularly that do that dipping, but remember they're working largely with koa, which is a wood. If you've ever worked with, maybe I've just had bad luck with koa, but I found it to be just a bitch to work with. It's dusty, it splits.
You're early.
And
Are you on live? Yeah.
And if I could see we're soaking it in oil, you know, it's like putting on lather before you shave. If you soak the piece in oil before you do your finished cuts, it's like, you know, Dale does that. He'll rub down his bowl before he does his last shear cuts on the surface. Same idea. So I can see where that might happen. As far as a finishing method, if you lived in Arizona, I'd say go for it. You set it out on the back porch and, you know, let it sit for a day and you're done. Anywhere without that much heat and light, it's going to take a long time for it to set up, even if you have an oil that tends toward polymerization.
That brings up a good question is, are there certain woods that certain finishes just should not be used on?
It's, you know, rule one with me has always been wood should look like wood, and wood should feel like wood. The really oily woods, cocoa bolo, ebony, African blackwood especially, kingwood, the desert ironwood. These are woods that are so dense and so fine grained that we can't improve on the finish. My feeling is you sand them, wet sand them to about 7,000 and let them go. Let the surface speak for itself. If you're going to finish one of those high oil, any of the Dalbergerons actually, rosewood, any of the multitude of rosewoods, if you're going to try to put any kind of finish on that, you need to get the oil out of the surface or it's just not going to stick. You can do that by rubbing down the surface with acetone or denatured alcohol works sometimes. Acetone's not as likely to raise the grain. That's one of those liquids that takes up very small amounts of water in the air. But that will get the oil off of the surface a little bit and give you a chance to kind of replace that surface oil with your finish. Really dry woods, walnut, koa, mahogany fits into that category. They're cherry, sometimes cherry. The eastern cherry, that you know that all the furniture is made of, not the one that grows the fruit out here. That's a wood unto itself. That can be dry and uneven is more the case with those. Those you have to be very careful about making sure the surface is uniformly saturated before you go to finish it. And there are, you know, lots of ways to do that. If you're finishing on the lathe, just put on the first coat with the lathe not turning so that you can see the dry spots before they pop up.
What if you turn a piece of green wood really thin and you want to be done with it? You finish green wood or let it dry and then finish?
You know, that we've now reached the edge of my expertise because that's not something I've done very much. And I would think if you're going to finish it, I would let it dry. But then again, on the other hand, I can see that if you put a film finish onto a green piece of wood, it's going to slow down the rate of drying, which pays your money and takes your choices there.
I'll tell you in a week, Roger. I did a green bowl yesterday down to 1 inch and put walnut oil on it. We'll see what happens.
A 1 inch is not a finished dimension.
I mean, an 1/8 inch.
Oh,
1/8 inch. Yeah.
you know, I bet you it turns out all right. Because there's just enough. The reason that the green wood cracks is that the water moves to the surface faster than it moves away from the surface. So, you know, if you can sort of, or no, it's the other way around. It moves away from the surface faster than it moves to the surface. So you get wood that dries, and you know it'll split that way. If you put a barrier on it, a water barrier, it's like anchor seal. It may turn out, it may look like a canoe by next week. You know?
You will find out.
I've had good luck doing that. I showed somebody some pieces I have in my shed where they're rough turned, but I seal the whole outside and leave the inside unfinished, and I have a lot less cracking. They're little vases and they're made out of sequoia, but I've had good luck sealing the outside with either an anchor seal type or walnut oil.
Yeah. In either case, they're doing the same thing. They're cutting down the rate at which water can leave the piece of wood, so you get a more uniform.
And you're controlling it so it comes out of the middle instead of off the edge.
Off the edge. Exactly.
And I just throw them out in my shed for a year, and I've had pretty good luck. In fact, most of that oak we got last year, I only lost one piece.
Yeah, you know, most of that oak we got last year is still out in my spalt garden. This summer when it starts to warm up, I'll pull them out from. I have a big date-or cedar in the front yard, so we got a nice acidic, fungus-rich area underneath the cedar because of the needles, and I put those pieces under that and cover it with a rug and just let it sit. And that oak spalts in the early experiments. The oak spalts beautifully, so I'm hoping to have some nice pieces this summer from that. Anyway, someone mentioned Sarah's before the audio thing. I was over at Sarah's last week, and she has a place that we can put things, put wood, and let me see if I can. I have a picture of the gate you go through to get to this storage area. And if you want to take some stuff over, I'll send you the picture so you know where to put the wood. She's having her gardener clean things up, and we got 4 pallets to put things on. It's sort of back by her artichoke garden, so be in good company. Anyway.
Good. Any other questions? I think, Arnie, you had some questions? You're muted.
There we go. I was wondering if anybody uses the wax system with the wheels and you apply the wax to it.
Oh yeah, the
be-all?
The be-all
Yeah.
system. Yeah. Yes.
I do.
Yeah.
And what finishes do you use it with?
So normally I'll do it over, if I've already walnut oiled the piece, then I'll use the 3-step. And I've had good luck with it. It depends on what I'm doing.
Yeah, I use it a lot. One thing I've found, though, that if there's any flaws, I mean, if you haven't sanded it perfectly, it brings out all the flaws.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It's very unforgiving.
Yeah.
So this one was done using that. And that's just a piece of cherry.
Okay.
So,
well, in addition, some finishes, you need to be sure that the finish is 100% cured if you're going to use the Beal system.
It will blister the hell out of a lot of things.
Absolutely, especially lacquer or finishes like that.
Yeah. Because it gets hot, you know.
Well, I'll tell you one thing you don't want to do is use the brie wax and then try to use the Be-All buffing system because it just makes a mess.
Yeah.
And you have to use a thinner and clean it off. But don't, the brie wax doesn't really like to be buffed like that.
I have a question.
Oh, go ahead.
So why go to the extra step of using the Be-All buffing system? Why not use a finish that gives you the finish you want?
Because this can be done quick and you don't have to wait for it to dry. You can do the 3 steps in 10 or 15 minutes and it's done.
Remember, the first 2 steps of that are abrasives. You have the Tripoli and then the white diamond. So you're actually, if you're lucky, taking out surface flaws or making them worse, depending on how you look at it. The only last step, the carnauba wax wheel, is the only one that's actually a sealing step.
Well, in addition, the wax finish of the Beal system, it's a completely different look. It may have a sheen to it, but it's a completely different look than a poly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It just depends on what I'm in the mood to do that day.
What you can do is, before you actually put the film finish on, is use the first 2 wheels. Actually, the Tripoli, if there's any sort of porousness to the wood, it's going to leave brown stuff in any sort of surface, whatever's. The white diamond, my lovely assistant, the white diamond leaves them, but you don't notice them. And this is about a 15,000 grit, whereas the Tripoli is 8 to 10,000 grit. So once you've done that, it's like using Hampshire sheen, or if you got some diatomaceous earth stuff. It cleans up the surface a little bit, and then you can put your film finish onto that, because the 2 abrasives, you just take a cloth and you do a friction polish that will pull the wax that it's carried in off the surface. So you can go back and put whatever finish you want on top of that. I don't know. It's if you're doing like the poly, you can just make mirrors out of a polyurethane finish with that stuff, or lacquer, as Jim says, it is absolutely completely dry.
And even then, you can screw it up. Let me tell you.
You can basically melt the lacquer and get it to boil out.
Yeah, I found that on my steers. I use the be all system. I don't use any finish. I just sand it to whatever, 400 or whatever, and then put on the be all system, and it usually turns out beautiful. Because putting the finish on steers is a challenge. So, but yeah, even before. But whatever, even if it's just walnut oil, it has to be well dried.
Yeah.
Because it screws up. I mean, it gets hot.
As you figure, even a walnut oil finish, if you friction polished it, the top millimeter or so has been polymerized by the heat. But there's probably 3 millimeters of oil in the wood below that. Now, given time, you take that bowl and set it over here, it will just continue to set up over time. But if you take it to the Beal, even though the top is dry, you can generate enough heat to actually boil the finish out.
And my opinion is you might as well just finish it on the lathe. Put your wax on the lathe.
And it depends. Where I use it most often is for the Alumilite, the hybrid blanks, because that's how you finish plastic. And it does a gorgeous job, because I don't put a film finish on the Alumilite pieces. Let the surface speak for itself. And the Beal on that, Beal buff on that is a pretty good system. You do actually put a little bit of wax on with the end. I think that it's a muslin wheel, so that's a very rough, but it's like buffing with a brown paper bag. It's a very high grit abrasive, and I think the wax is more keeping things cool than waxing. Again, the only question is, what do you like?
Yeah.
I like somebody else to do it for me.
Yeah. On the subject of showing up flaws, my grandfather was a cabinet maker, and my dad was a shop teacher. So I started woodworking with them, and my grandfather's shop always had a big outside area. And he said, well, whenever I finish a piece, I like to do it outside if I can. And okay, I thought it was to get the dust out of the shop and that sort of thing. But my dad told me one time, no, it's because of the natural light. Natural light shows up flaws in wood. And I was reading something the other day, and someone says, well, you always have a daylight spectrum light bulb over your workbench because the blue light, the 5,000 degree K light spectrum will show up flaws. Ta-da. This is a portable 5,000 degree Kelvin light source. It's a daylight thing. And it's frightening. You know, you think you're done, you shine this on your piece of wood, and it looks like a road map of New York City. There are scratches that you never occurred you were there. And so what I've started doing is, if off the tool, I expect to get about a 180, I would start at 180 grit to finish. And I'll do my first sanding, clean it, check it with this. If I see the marks, I go back and I do it again. Or I'll go back to a lower grit and work up through 180 again until I can shine this on the wood and there's no scratches, or at least scratches I can live with. Now, I don't know if it's because the eye is most sensitive to the blue frequency, that somehow the blue light shows up more. But
Is that a full spectrum light?
Full spectrum, full spectrum daylight is the one. When you go to buy a light bulb, it'll say daylight or soft white or something like that. The daylight is the one that's blue rich. And the daylight bulb has a lot of other uses. But I now have daylight bulbs over my lathe and my little portable sunspot here. And so far,
that's a good lead into the second half of the topic, and that's the sanding aspect. Finishing is the last step, sanding is the first step. And does anyone have any questions on sanding? And what do you
Roger, before we get there, I'm not sure that the question Mike Porter sent in got thoroughly addressed.
It hasn't. I was hoping Mike would call in, but let me just read it here. If one uses walnut oil finish and wet sands with the same oil, with some woods, black walnut for me especially, the oil continues to seep out at the base where the foot of the bowl is. A ring of oil shows up on a paper towel or a kitchen counter or cupboard and does so for weeks and weeks after finishing. How to prevent this or stop it from happening? So I guess he's saying that the base doesn't.
if you think about the base is the area of the bowl that's going to be friction polished the least, because you just can't get down there and the bottom. Now, when I do a bowl, I'll do it as best I can and turn it around and put it in a vacuum chuck. And I'll finish the bottom and I'll finish sand it, and I'll actually friction polish the bottom, with the bowl being the outside, the bottom being the outside surface. And I don't have that problem. I'm also very careful to get it good and hot. And occasionally,
Could Mike be using a different kind of walnut oil? I mean, Mike Meredith talked about some walnut oils not polymerizing.
If he's using the Mahoney's oil, you remember when the AEW was here, Mahoney had these beautiful sets of nested bowls in the instant gallery. They were just gorgeous.
Yeah.
And you got about a foot away, and then they smelled like an outhouse.
Oh.
That's bacterial rancidification, which means the oil is not setting up. So if that's a problem with the Mahoney oil, with also other olive oils. With the oil that I use, if you let it set up, if you friction polish it, you got a pretty good chance. And I mean, you got to feel the heat. Feel the heat through the towel. If it's a big bowl, a large diameter, large thickness bowl at the bottom, I'll finish the bottom, let it sit for an hour, then go back and friction polish it again. Let the heat move anything sort of readily accessible to the surface so I can get it that second time around. The thickness of the wood is going to absorb the heat. The thicker the wood, the longer it's going to take to actually get it hot enough to polymerize the oil.
What does the hour delay by you?
Sometimes I'll see little spots of oil on the bottom. What it does do is that, the bowl is warm, and if there's oil that is close to the surface and not polymerized, the heat expands it and it's going to come to the surface. in that hour, like I say, sometimes you'll see little glistenings of oil. I'll see little glistenings of oil on the bottom. And I wipe those off and friction polish it again and let it sit for another hour. And you do that until you don't see any more oil. It's rare that happens.
We had a comment earlier about in the vacuum chuck, it would suck the oil out.
It can suck it through, yeah. Yeah, that is possible.
What is the temperature that the bowl has to get up to in order for it to polymer? Yeah, I can't say it. To cure out.
Warm enough that you don't want to hold the towel very long. That's all I know.
So when you're talking about the oil deeper in the wood setting up, can you like, I don't know, put it into an oven at a certain temperature to make it set up, or is that too hot?
Well, that would be our analog of living in Arizona and setting it on the back porch.
Right. What temperature is that? Do you have a?
About 90 degrees.
About 90 degrees.
Yeah. You don't want to. And there's some woods like flame box elder don't do that because the pigment is heat sensitive as well as light sensitive. But yeah, if you just warm it up. I mean, people think I'm joking, but I ask them. Someone calls, they have a question about it. I say, well, where do you live? And they say, well, if they say Arizona, New Mexico, Southern California, I say, set it outside. You're in business. If you're in Maine or in Minnesota or Hungary on the Great Lakes there in Wisconsin, it's going to take a little bit longer just because of the temperature. That's why that initial friction polishing is really important.
How about using a microwave?
I've never had the nerve to try that. I can't think of any reason why it wouldn't work, except that there's not much water in it, and a microwave only heats up water. So depending on how much residual moisture you've got in the wood, you might not generate that much heat.
I think it also matters the speed you're running your lathe. I think if you're running your lathe at a very low speed when you're doing that, then the oil stays in and it doesn't come to the surface and polymerize as well as if you're turning faster. The centrifugal force moves the oil out and causes. I have a better luck if I spin a little bit faster.
Yeah. Also, if you're friction polishing at a higher speed, you're going to get more heat. So, and if you're in the center of a bowl, that section is spinning slower than the outside of the bowl. It's like the conservation of angular momentum. The farther you go away from the center, the faster the thing has to spin. So
So in the last 10 minutes or so, let's talk a little bit about sanding. We can tell through our store, a lot of people use the sanding disc, and a lot of people use just sheets of sanding paper. I happen to be a 2-inch sanding disc guy, but what do you guys? What's popular for you guys?
80 grit makes all turners equal.
Yep. It's not a mortal sin to use the 80 grit gouge. Not a problem.
I like the 3-inch round with these scalloped edges personally.
Green stuff, yeah.
2 is too small for most of I guess it depends on the size of the bowl, but I recently bought at Woodcraft some of the Mirka fabric type discs, and boy, those are impressive. I always had used sandpaper prior, but I'm going to start switching over to that.
Is it Evernet?
Yeah.
Do those last longer than traditional paper?
Yes, it does, and it doesn't clog up. You can sand it with. I'm not a big wet sanding guy, but I do have good success with walnut oil, even though it's Mahoney's. I didn't know any better when I bought it.
That's what you do
now. I do, yeah. And so you can sand walnut oil either wet or dry after it sets up, and not clog your sandpaper. And I used to use Watco because I had gallons of it from my furniture days, which is a blend of tung oil and linseed oil and something else. And that just kills sandpaper immediately, unless you're truly trying to wet sand a flat surface with 600 grit or something, then it works well. But for bowl turning, I don't use the Watco type stuff anymore because it just absolutely, it makes a nice surface. But if you ever have to go back and correct or redo a spot, you're going to go through those sanding discs, which aren't free, immediately, and they just gum up and you can't clean them.
Yeah.
So I like that the mesh type, it happens to be the Merca brand that they sell. With walnut oil, it really works good. And I use air just to blow them off. You don't have to, they just blow it, it just comes right out.
You can actually throw them in the laundry if they get too badly plugged up.
Is that right?
Soap and water, because the abrasive is not attached to the fibers, it's in the fibers.
Yeah.
Yeah, I take Abernet and wash it in warm water or dish soap and restores them completely. Use them over and over again.
Well, it was, Abernet was developed for the automobile industry. That's what they use to sand the paint finishes. And you know, they can't be changing all the time, so they have them on the suction rigs, and it just sucks the dust through it. And you can go all day.
Yeah.
And it just keeps working. So, yeah,
Right.
It's great stuff. Dry or wet. It's dry, it's just as good.
Yep.
But you can wet sand. And I watched one of Mike Meredith's videos about sanding, and I had a inhaling dust problem a few years ago, and the doctor finally figured out it was the infection I had was caused by sanding dust. So I try to use the walnut oil for sanding, either that or if it's dry, then I'll use I ran a pipe from my big dust collector over the lathe, which is a huge help, by the way.
You can put a fan behind you.
Or that, yeah.
Yeah, because you got the fan blowing this way and you got this sucking this way.
Yeah.
I use sandpaper wise. I use almost exclusively this Merca gold.
Oh yeah.
Gold flex that we sell in the store.
Yeah.
I love the stuff. Really great. Sometimes I use the Abernet if I'm doing some pretty coarse grit and need to remove a lot of bad turning. But then I'll go to this stuff, and I like it, and you can use it wet too.
The point about sandpaper and wet sanding is how the abrasive is held in place. Now, like the Abernet, the abrasive is in the fiber, and Abralon, which is the foam-backed version of Abernet, the abrasive is in the fiber. And with this, I think it's a lot of the commercial sandpapers are made with water-soluble adhesives. So if you're wet sanding with water, your abrasive comes off. If you're wet sanding with oil, doesn't matter. So, you know, about any kind of sandpaper you like. I like the sanding discs, particularly for bowls, but I don't make that many bowls. I make mostly small stuff. And I get the Klingspor shop rolls. 1, 2, 3, 6 inches wide. I found that if I get different grits and different widths, it's a whole lot easier than trying to find the grit mark on the back of the paper, which seems to be about 18 inches apart on the rolls. So, you know, that the cloth back allows you to fold it very finely. So if you're sanding between beads, it works very well. So again, the question is, what do you like?
You guys use power drills with your sandpaper, or you just hold it by hand?
Power drills.
On a bowl, certainly, yeah.
I use an inertia sander. If I'm going to use a power sander, I'll use a DA air sander with double action.
Okay.
But mostly I use the inertia sanders.
Yeah, I've got the random orbital sanders, the pneumatic random orbitals work pretty well. Yeah, work pretty well.
I use this one
Anybody
because
else use
it's got bearings. This one's got bearings in the head of it that are replaceable.
Nice. Does anybody else use the roll-lock discs?
Well, the little thing on the back that locks actually into the platform.
Right.
Yeah.
I really like those because the individual things that you attach the disc to, their Velcro attachment, you can just flip on and off your power sander. And so you can get all the different grits there. And then if you say, okay, enough of this one, it's really fast to change to the next grit. And I've had one set for well over a year, and they seem to be pretty durable.
Yeah, I sand every way possible, and one of those is whenever I'm using a drill, I will use those that you're talking about, Harvey, that I think you get from Wood Turner's Wonders or something,
Right.
the ultimate sanding something. They're yellow, and
Right.
they're indestructible, and I've had mine for probably 4 or 5 years now, and
How do you keep those from coming apart? You know, you lock the pad into the holder.
so here's the thing. Here, the only negative to it is you can't reverse sand, because when you reverse sand, it pops off. It's just a quarter turn or half turn, and it locks it in. And it's a little bit like a chuck on a lathe. It's turning to tighten it itself. It's self-tightening. So it's the same thing. It's self-tightening when you go forward. When you go backwards, it comes right off.
So if you reverse the drill, could you reverse sand it?
Oh, yeah, you probably could. I'm going to try that. Or, well, let's see, would that happen?
No, it'll come off.
It would still come off, I think.
Because this is the direction of this thread. If you try to go backwards, this will come off and go flying across your shop.
Yeah, I've had that happen more than once.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's how I know. But this part is pretty indestructible. But I have had this part fail on me, where you get it too hot and it starts to separate the glue from the pad. So
I don't use that soft intermediate pad or whatever that is.
Oh, you just use that?
Well,
the harder.
What I did was I actually put them on my lathe, my 3-inch ones, and I used not a skew, but something like a skew to kind of flare it so that it goes like this, and so it's a little more flexible on the sides.
Clever.
And I like that, so that works for me. I also use the cling spore, and I think the cling spore is really great when you're wet sanding. I'm not a big fan of using the drill while you wet sand. For some reason it just feels like it goes too fast and it's clogs up a little bit too much, or it doesn't sand as well.
The way you get around that is you take a little plastic thing and you put a magnet in it, and you put the little plastic bowl on the ways of your lathe with a magnet to hold it in place. Then every now and then you just dip the end of the drill into the walnut oil in the bowl, and that sort of rinses the surface.
Huh. Okay.
Yeah, but if you think about, even if you're just barely turning the drill, the combined circulation, you're doing a lot of sanding in a short amount of time.
Yeah.
Who likes to sand?
Yeah, if you want one of those bowls, just go get one of the magnetic part bowls from Harbor Freight.
Yeah, right. But I got tons of plastic, sour cream containers sitting around. So
yogurt containers.
Yep.
Get them by the gross.
It all works just fine.
So you can get these free from Harbor Freight with the coupon.
Yeah.
So I have a simple sanding question. One of my daughters-in-law wanted candlesticks. So I made her candlesticks, and it's spindle turning. And I aspire to get a finish off my tool that doesn't need to be sanded. But I don't always get that, and then I have to sand. And I noticed that on the spindles in particular, I get sanding marks that are concentric circles. They're in the direction that the piece is spinning. And I don't know when to stop with one grit and move to the next grit. I've been to get rid of them. I've actually been stopping the lathe and moving the sandpaper in the direction of the grain back and forth to take off the circular sanding
should
marks.
do anyway before you move to the next grit. If you can, you should always sand with the grain of the wood. The question of when you stop, when you've gotten all of the sanding marks from the previous grit out. If you're going from from 180 to 220. You stop the 220 when all the 180 marks are gone. And the same thing when you go to from 220 to 320. And you look at it, actually a magnifying glass is not a bad thing, just to sort of get a better look at what you're actually working on. You'll see very clearly there are two different sizes of grooves in wood.
I haven't tried that.
And
One thing. Oh, go ahead, Mike.
No, it's just a lot of times I get calls from customers saying, "Well, I can't get the rings out. It's the finish. It's setting up too wrong." No, it's your sanding. Let's go back and do that again. And what I tell them to do is that if it's a lot easier to go back a grit and sand some more than it is to go back 4 grits when you're done and you got rings in your project. So it's just one of those things. Nobody likes to sand. Nobody wants to pay that much attention to it. But at the end of the project, that's one of the most important things you're going to do. And also remember, you start finishing a piece the first time your tool touches the wood. So everything you do along the way that causes an imperfection in the surface is going to cause an imperfection in the finish.
So
anyway.
I don't mean to open a can of worms, but I think that the speed in which you sand is pretty important too. And I know there's a whole bunch of people that talk about sanding slow, but if I'm turning pens, I'll sand them at 2,000 RPMs and I get a perfect finish. So I think it's whatever works best for you. I know there's a whole argument that I'm sanding too fast, and I've read all the articles, but I like the results I get. So I just
the only reason not to sand that fast is heat checking, and some woods are never going to check, and some are. And it's like cutting. Remember, sandpaper is a cutting tool, and the faster the wood is moving for a cutting tool, the better cuts you're going to get. So
right. So for Harvey's question, I was coming up with the same problem, and all I did is started increasing the speed of my lathe when I'm doing pens or candlesticks or other cylinder work, and then I used the foam backed squares that we sell at the store, and they come out really, really clean. So but I do turn the speed up to about 2,000 RPMs when I'm sanding those for 2 reasons. One, I get a great finish and it's really, really quick. I hit one grit, hit the next grit, hit the next grit, and I'm done.
You get that speed. Also, the key is to make sure that your sanding paper is constantly moving too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also,
one thing I've learned is that before going to the next grit, I'll wipe it down with mineral oil or sometimes alcohol, denatured alcohol, because that really shows up any fine scratches, and also have good lighting, as has been mentioned before. If you see scratches, you'll see a distribution of sizes probably, so you got to go back, as Mike said, go back a grit or maybe 2 grits and start wetting it down, wiping it down, really helps show up the scratches.
Well, the denatured alcohol is going to raise the grain just a little bit too. Not much, but it'll raise it just a little bit. But it's the other thing you can do is the reason that I use the Klingspor paper is that I've never gotten an 80 grit sanding granule on a 400 grit piece of paper, and I've gotten that with every other brand of sandpaper. So just to eliminate one more thing, take that magnifying glass and look at your sandpaper, and if you're seeing an uneven distribution of size, maybe another brand of sandpaper might help. That's kind of the last thing. You blame somebody else when you've taken care of all the things you're doing.
I had an aha moment too about sandpaper, and that was that the pressure that I exert, that I hold it down. If I got tear out, if you take the 80 grit or the 120 grit and you really get into it like that, you're going to have to press that hard with the subsequent grits to get those scratch marks out. So when you're doing 80 grit, if you have to do 80 grit, do it lightly and only where you need it. And then the next grit, you're going to be sanding it at the same pressure, exerting on it. if that makes sense. Does that make sense?
That was good input. Yeah, I like
Yeah,
that.
just don't push too hard when you're using the coarser grits or any grit actually. But
We don't want to do grit shaming here, you know. But if you've like it in a bull, if you see there are areas of tear out, that's can of spray shellac is a great thing.
Yeah.
Just take your spray shellac that area, sand it again. And a lot of times that shellac will stiffen the grain just enough to get a better cut with either the tool or the sandpaper.
I've been doing that with sanding sealer, just the wet sanding sealer.
That works.
But it does. But you're right about the spray can. It's just put it on, it sets up, and then you can sand that out.
Yeah.
I was going to ask about de-wax shellac as a sealer before going the next layer.
De-wax shellac works really pretty well. I would cut it to 1 pound.
Mm-hmm.
What it is as out of the can,
It's 2.
Diluted 50-50 with denatured alcohol, and because it's going to penetrate faster.
Is that is that the sanding sealer, the bullseye?
Yeah, it's bullseye seal coat.
Seal coat, yeah.
I use that for furniture. That's why I was just thinking it might work well on turnings as well.
Yeah, it will. But give it a try. But I think you'll find that if you dilute it, you're going to get absorption into wood so much quicker. And for a sealer, I mean, that's what you're looking for. You want to seal the surface as quick as you can and move on. The 2 pound is kind of actually sort of thick. So you're sort of moved into the film coat, the film finish realm there.
Yeah, I use the 2 coat. I use the 2. I've got some open grain woods for furniture. I've been using that on.
Yeah, that would be great for that. You figure Pens Plus is 1.5 pounds cut of shellac. If you're using that, so.
Guys, we've gone almost 15 minutes over. We could probably talk for another 4 hours on this topic. Anyone have any last questions you want to bring up?
No. Mike,
does anybody have a good way to sand the inside of a small box?
Carefully.
I've seen people who have taken like a dowel and split it and then put sandpaper in the split. That might work and keep your hands safe.
Yeah,
I've done that trick, and I also use some large forceps to hold sandpaper.
Yeah.
But you don't put your fingers in the holes in the handle of the forceps.
No.
You hold it
That'll
around.
rip your finger off. That'll deglove your finger. That's not good.
Or actually, if you just put the sandpaper and wrap it around your finger inside the box, it's going to let go of your finger before it actually pulls your finger anywhere. Your finger's going to let go of the sandpaper. And it just, I don't know, it's easier. You're always there. So you don't have to go find a forcep. But it all works.
I only sand as far as I can reach anyway, because if you can't reach to see if it's smooth, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, but a lot of us have longer fingers.
My problem is they're fat.
Okay, guys. Well, I hope everyone enjoyed it today. I think.
Absolutely.
Listen, hey, for a new turner, this has been wonderful.
Great.
Oh, welcome.
Okay.
Roger.
Dave,
Roger, one thing, if nobody's going to do that last box, I'll do it.
Okay. Send me an email. Actually, John Sutter has the last box, so I'll put you two in contact with each other.
Where's he located?
He's on the river. He's on this side, but he has a houseboat on the river. So.
Oh, okay.
But he may meet you somewhere.
Because I live on the west side, so.
Okay, it's not too bad. Anyways, if you have a chance to go see his place, it's pretty fantastic.
Oh, okay.
Quick question for Mike Meredith.
Yes.
So, excuse my ignorance, but you keep mentioning your product, and I don't know what that is.
Yeah, I was going to ask that same question, but I thought I'd do it via email.
Here you go. It's this.
Oh,
infomercials, but
okay, I know what that is.
He's the doctor.
I did not realize.
Doctor's Woodshop.
Okay.
Steve Newberry and Judge Rakowski could claim that title also, since they were there when the Doctor's Woodshop wood website was born.
I have to tell you, Woodcraft is about out of it, so hopefully they'll do more.
Hey,
So that's the oil product?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, okay.
I should get an advertising
You
commission.
should. Actually, if you're going to be in Glenn's class tomorrow, I'm going to be there too because he asked me to. Cornelia asked me to come along and talk about the walnut finishing oil.
Oh,
So, and I will send you guys a picture of the gate you go through at Sarah's house to drop off the wood.
perfect.
Cool. Okay, thanks everyone. We'll meet again in about a month.
Stay safe.
Okay.
Thanks, Rod.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.